Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the podcast where I get to ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. My guest this week is a retired deputy chief from the Seattle Fire Department, having served over 30 years in the fire service. He literally wrote the book on instruction in the fire service. He is the owner of Ignition Point Training, where he is known nationally for teaching the art of reading smoke, air management, and tactical decision making. It's my great pleasure to chat with today retired Deputy Chief Phil Joes. Good afternoon, Chief. How are you?
I'm good, Jake. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Of course. Yeah, I appreciate your time coming in. So as is the format of the show, we always open it up with our wheel of stupid questions. Just as a reminder that asking questions is good. And even if they're stupid, if you point them at the right people, you can sometimes get some pretty good answers. So with that, we'll start with the wheel of stupid questions. All right, it's time for the wheel. Spin the wheel and we see what we get. Okay. Chief Phil Joes, what is your late night, I'm feeling fat snack? You're driving home. I'm stopping at the gas station. What are you picking up? You're in shape guy. What's the cheat meal?
Well, if it's at the gas station, we at home we have these. They sell them at Costco. They're like acai berries that are coated in chocolate.
Okay.
And,
so even your cheat meal is
with acai berries in the middle. But there's a little cupboard where it's got like there's the acai berries, and then the blueberry one is next to that. And then so my wife said a chocolate aficionado. We actually have a friend who's a chocolate importer. So whenever we see him, we get this whole collection of chocolate. But wow. It's going to be chocolate something.
Wow, look at that. Even your cheat meal involves fruit. That's pretty great. You're a pretty healthy guy. My cheat meal definitely doesn't have any fruit involved with it. Good for you. All right, so let's get to it. So you spent over 30 years working in the fire service. Why? Why did you start in the fire service? What's the origin story?
Well, I was going to school for computer engineering. This was like in the early 80s, right? So if I would have stuck with that, I'd probably be independently wealthy right now. But I liked the study, but the people weren't really my people. So I was just struggling a little bit, you know. And being a young man, and I came home for the summer. My brother asked me if I wanted to play softball. And I said, yes. And he said, well, you have to be a volunteer fireman to do that. And I was like, okay, how do I do that? So then he drove me down to the firehouse where he was already volunteering and signed me up. And, you think about it now, it seems crazy, but I had 2 weekends. So 16 hours twice. I had 32 hours of training. And then I got my pager and my bunker gear, and I went to one fire, and man, that was it. Like there was just, from that moment, there was just no going back. I just this is, they'll actually pay you to do this was sort of my thinking. Now then it still took me, 3.5 years to get hired somewhere. And I became not only volunteer, but I lived at the firehouse for almost 2 full years, right? I was living there. In exchange for my room, I was serving. So I was we had a 3-platoon rotation for the guys who were residents. And so you worked at 6 at night until 8 in the morning, or until you had to go to work. And I went to work at 4:45. So I'd leave the firehouse around 4:15, 4 o'clock, 4:15 to go to work. Then I'd go to school. Then I'd come back to the firehouse and, carry my pager with me and all that kind of jazz. I did that till I got hired in the city of Seattle.
Wow. So you said that first fire was kind of a turning point for you. What do you remember about it?
Well, I wasn't qualified to go in yet. I think I still needed another 4 hours of training or something, because apparently 32 hours isn't quite enough. Which again is crazy when you think about it. But, like I was handing off tools, and these guys were cutting the roof open. And I mean, it was a good working house fire. I mean, it took a while to get it under control. It was all volunteer area at the time. And that area now is 100% paid fire department because of the growth, obviously, since you're talking about the early 80s, right? So 40 years later. But just the physical nature of it, even the reloading of the hose and all of those things where you have that opportunity, not just to be of service, but to interact with your team and do something for your community and all those sort of aspects. And, when I talked about going to college, I was like, the school part was fun and interesting, but the people were really my people. And these were definitely my people.
So you didn't have anyone in your family previous that was working in the fire service at all?
Just my brother, who was also a volunteer. So he's 2 years older than me. And he was paramedic. He worked for the city of Bremerton Fire Department for over 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So that was, if he hadn't introduced me to the fire service, I don't know if I ever would have discovered it. Right. And, who knows, but from there, I'm always grateful to the citizens of the city of Seattle for giving me an opportunity as a young kid to work there, to be of service to them. I mean, literally everything in my life I owe to the citizens of that city. I love that city. I love the people who live there. I love everything. I mean, there's problems like there's in any city. Yeah. But the citizens of that town and the tax money that they paid have given me everything in my life.
Yeah. So you grew up outside of Seattle, like close by, or?
Yeah, I lived high school and stuff. I lived up there. I live in Pocatello, Idaho now, which is southeast Idaho. We're in that. I think Idaho's like the boot. We're in the very toe of that boot. We're close to Utah, close to Wyoming.
Okay.
And so I grew up in this area. This is where I live in my wife's hometown right now. We're about a mile from her parents. And so my family moved up to the Pacific Northwest in 1976. So that's the late 1900s, as somebody in your generation might call it. Yeah. Right. And then from there, went to high school, started college, and then that's how I got the fire department.
And then Seattle was just the most next logical decision, biggest department in that area.
Yeah. Well, and I tested everywhere.
Okay.
There was I think 4 or 5. There's one time, I was in the top 3 and they hired 2.
No.
So, that was before the internet and all that stuff. So there was a pretty big network. Now, nobody had cell phones or anything, right? So, you had to call places and ask them if they were hiring. And then we had a sort of a network group that we had put together that was, feeding information about where jobs were. And it was, when I took Seattle's test, I got high enough on that. I was number 3 on their list. And so I felt like that was a pretty good, as close to guarantee as you're ever going to get. Then the city had I was like 8 or 9 months into testing, but the city was in the middle. They ended up at the Supreme Court for their hiring practices. So the list actually got extended, and I was thinking, I can't believe I'm going to be, number 3 on the list, and then they're going to expire the list without hiring anybody, right? That was what I was thinking at the time. And it's 3.5 years, so I started to think about some other way to do something different. I mean, maybe this isn't going to work out for me, and then I got hired there, and the rest is history, as they say.
So then walk me through your career with Seattle, right? Obviously, you progressed through the ranks. I know you were involved in the training department at one point, but how did that kind of progression happen?
Yeah, so I was mostly at Station 6, right? So I did my probie time. I worked in the 5th Battalion, which is southeast Seattle. It's probably the busiest firefighting battalion. It's a double house, so Station 6 is double house. I was riding backwards there on the truck. And I had a couple of different officers, and I was just starting to, I think I had 7 or 8 years, and I was just sort of starting to get itchy, and started talking to my wife about that. She said, "Hey, why don't you think about becoming a lieutenant?" And I was like, "Yeah, that seems reasonable." So there's a guy there's a guy I commuted with all the time named Casey Phillips, and he was getting ready to take the test. So we just started studying together and practicing together. We drill each other in the car, all that kind of stuff. And then when I made lieutenant, I thought, oh, I'm going to get to choose all these things that I get to do, all these things that I didn't have control over before, I'm going to have control over it. Then I quickly realized, like I think a lot of people do, that, yeah, the things that you have control over don't matter to you as much as the other things, the new things that you don't have control over.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You don't have influence. Influence is a better way to put that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then, well, if I was captain, then I can influence some of those things. And so same thing, you get to captain, yeah, you can influence those things. You have, they're in your circle of control there, but then there's the next. So at least up to deputy chief, it was kind of always my thinking. It's like, well, could I have some influence as a battalion chief that I don't have as a captain, or a way that I can do it, a way that I can influence the organization? And during that whole time, so at each rank, I also went back to the training division. So obviously I was there as a recruit, right? Mm-hmm. Went back as a lieutenant and taught drill school. And we were hiring a lot then. So we were doing classes of 30 and 40 people, which those are, 3.5 or 4 months. That's a period of time. And then you have a little bit of time in between to sort of, spend time with your family and rehab the gear and do all that stuff. And then, you start again at week 1. And I love that really sparked in me the teaching bug. I had to really perfect the way that I interacted with students. I felt a moral obligation I was terrible. I was a terrible instructor when I first started. I was terrible. It's like, but these 5 people have quit their life to come work for the Seattle Fire Department. I have a responsibility to them to give them the best opportunity for them to succeed. Now, I've had students fail, and I've had to let people, recommend people for termination. As deputy chief, I've had to do separation interviews and that, make the actual decision to let people go. But I always felt this moral obligation to give them the best that I could, so that if they were failing, it wasn't because of some lack of effort on my part or on the part of the organization, that we did everything we could to help them be successful. And not everybody's going to be successful, right? There is a standard. You have to maintain that. But as long as as long as I'm doing my part and the organization is doing its part, then it falls to the individual. And that just happens sometimes. So most time people are successful. And so I just worked really hard to be as good of an instructor as I could during that time, and, try to get feedback from mentors and read books about things. And, now you'd say, well, you can go on YouTube and all that stuff, right? But at the time, right, it's like, you had to go do actual research if you wanted to find out about adult learning or any of those sorts of things. It was a significant effort to go find those things, but I sought them out. Same thing for decision making. I teach decision making now, but I started that path by going, okay, how do I make better decisions? I'm arriving at fires as a lieutenant or then as a captain. And especially like where I was as captain, it could be 5, 6, 7 minutes before the battalion chief shows up. Mm-hmm. And in Seattle, in the SOG in Seattle, it says the ranking officer is responsible for what happens. So if you show up, and Seattle has a system where each apparatus, so an engine has 4 shifts, there's 3 lieutenants and 1 captain. And so in each battalion on each shift, there's 2 captains. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you show up there and you're the captain, you're responsible for what's going to happen at that event until the battalion chief shows up. Right. So I just started this path of learning how people make decisions, how to make better decisions, and spent a lot of time learning about that, because it was a major part of what I was doing on a day in, day out basis. Aside from the leadership stuff and aside from the managing people, is when you're at that incident scene, you're going to have to make decisions. You're going to have to communicate those decisions effectively. You're going to have to recognize when they're working, when they're not working, when the plant, like all those sorts of things that I'm sure that your audience is familiar with. I just worked really hard at being good at that stuff.
When you think about that, like that tactical decision making, how much is nature and how much is nurture? Do people have it, or do you have to develop it, or can you have a little bit of mix of a little bit of both?
Well, I think it's definitely a little bit of both. There's no doubt in my mind, at least, that there are some people who are just naturally more gifted at it. But it is a skill set. Making decisions is a skill set. Excuse me. Communicating decisions is a whole nother skill set. And I know people who, I've worked with a lot of people. There's people who can make excellent decisions, but they're terrible at communicating them. If you can't tell people what you need them to do in a short way and it's not enough that they might understand it, it's important that they not be able to misunderstand it. No matter, I always talk about, one of the things that I believe in my core is that it doesn't matter if you're good, you still need to practice. Michael Jordan was good, and he still had a coach, and he still went to practice, right? Everybody who wants to be really, really good at something, whatever those skill sets are, you have to practice them. And there is just literally, maybe there's a few people, like let's look at the level of a battalion chief, right? Not even deputy, but battalion, right? So if you're a battalion, you're still going to have a deputy coming in most places, not everywhere, but there's a rank at which you're still going to have somebody come in, and then there's a rank at which in Seattle was deputy, where you're the last one. Nobody's coming to bail you out of this command sequence, right? Yeah. But when you're at that level, you're not going to, there's only a few people in the country that are going to get enough sets and reps on incident scenes to be good. And I don't mean just competent. I don't mean minimally competent. I mean good. And so you have to practice, and you have to figure out a way to practice. And the reality is, when I became a battalion chief in Seattle, and even when I became a deputy, there was no training for chief officers. Like, you would get training in, HR and the fire code or those sorts of things. But there's literally, and this is true of most fire departments have no training for anybody who's a chief officer. None.
Do you think that's because it's difficult to do because of like the solitary nature of the job? Like, it's because, as a battalion chief coming into command, like it's you managing a scene, but in terms of practicing, you don't really need the other people to do the role, right? So it might make it easier, I suppose, in some ways, because you can do it by yourself. But, for a training division to facilitate training for that chief, it's labor intensive for one person, right?
Yeah, so I think it's a lack of recognition. My take would be that there's a lack of recognition that those skill sets are important. They need to be developed. They need to be maintained. They need to be the entire group, right? So. And maybe there's no maybe about it. It's more expensive to train chief officers, even if you're spending the same number of hours per person training. It's more expensive because chiefs are more expensive. Yeah. Right. So when I was running, so we started doing chiefs training when I was in the training division chief, and that was the only training that I got to actually run. Right. Was because we're training chief officers, and we'd have 3 chiefs there for training. 3 chiefs there to be there, to watch them, right? So that we could get the proper feedback. And then we would have somewhere between, and then I'd have 2 officers that were running the sim cell. And then we had on-duty officers that were being the sim cell. right? So, but even the overtime people, you're talking about 2 captains and 3 chief officers to train 3 chief officers, right? So it's essentially a higher than 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, that's expensive. But it doesn't have to be even that expensive. I mean, I trained when I was battalion chief, right? I would get together with the other battalion chiefs and we would do training on duty. Or when I was deputy chief, I would bring my battalions in. If we worked, there was a day of the week. I think it ended up being Saturdays because that was sort of the easiest day during football season. It was always Sundays because then if I bring the chiefs in for 2 hours on a Sunday, I can do it during the game, right? And none of the chiefs are going to complain about that, and none of the crews are going to be worried that the chiefs are training during the game. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I bring the 5 battalion chiefs in, and myself as a deputy, and we just run scenarios, and I would manage a lot of them, but I wouldn't manage all of them. And so then not only am I developing them as trainers, I'm developing their ability to feedback, right? Because they're not the focus of each person is only the focus of a training session once in a 5 chief rotation, right? So they're getting experience at watching and learning by listening, at providing feedback to the other battalion chiefs, and it at least from my perspective. The department was not organizing that or making us do that or doing any of those sorts of things. But I felt like it was a necessary component of they're the people that I supervise. They're my crew, right? When I get there and I have to put them, and I get to put them into forward locations, and I need feedback from them, and I need their eyes and ears on the roof or on floor 3 or whatever it is. I want the goal, right? When you're training teams of people in these types of environments, the goal is that you have a very good common operating philosophy and an understanding of what the expectations are. And you have an ability to communicate effectively in very brief, right? So succinct, accurate, timely, all those sorts of things. And so you can only build that with a team by interacting with the team and going to pretend incidents. And the pretend incidents, we didn't have some big $30 million training facility, right? We just have a computer, a whiteboard, a picture of a house on fire. There's a whole realm of training called tactical decision games that are very low fidelity, and low fidelity means low technology. You don't need a bunch of stuff to do decision-making training. You just there's a study, it's sitting right here on my desk, that shows that all you need is the minimum, right? You need the minimum fidelity of physical fidelity to create good cognitive fidelity. As long as you believe that you're at the incident and you behave as if you're at the incident and it flows like you're at an incident, that it's the research, the evidence shows across a lot of domains, fire being one domain, that achieving cognitive fidelity is relatively easy and cheap to do. And once you've done that, you don't need to spend any more money. In fact, you're better off to spend the money on creating more sets and reps than you are to creating more fidelity. But there's a belief that's generally accepted that high physical fidelity is necessary, and there's just no research to demonstrate that position. It increases learning marginally, right? But at least as far as what battalion chiefs do, and I think what company officers do, and like what firefighters do, it's all physical fidelity, right? You have to force doors, but you don't have to have a real door. You can have a pretend door, and you can go through it 10,000 times. And then when you see a real door, you're going to be very, very good at it, right? Yeah. And so the same thing. I mean, it's different because of the physical versus the mental nature. But those skills, the mental skills, can be trained and developed for sure.
The when I think about tactical decision making, I think one of the things that I think is the hardest is like calm under pressure. And is that a thing that can be nurtured out? Or I just think that I've seen such a varying degrees in chief officers over the years of like, just like cold as ice, like nothing phases them, and like total panic pretty much. And I don't know. And I'd be interested to get your opinion on whether like, you know, that total panic guy can train his way out of it, or is it like, you know, some people just are going to be calm and some people are not. And, you know, you have to like, you know, train to your skill set more so than like try to like do a square peg in a round hole kind of thing.
Well, I think, again, I think there's some natural proclivity to these things, but I'm a firm believer that stuff can be trained. And in fact, if so, there's two challenges here. One is people, by and large, my experience is that people are fairly accurate at predicting their own ability. They know when I can take it right back to the company level. You know, a company doesn't train all the time, doesn't want to go to training. Why? Because they know when they go there, they're not going to look very sharp because they know they don't train very often. Yeah. Now that's the company officer's responsibility, right? The individuals on that company could say something, but it's the officer's responsibility to make sure the team is competent, right? And so then they don't want to go to training. So it's this constant feedback loop of don't go to training, don't do training, we don't do training, so we're not good at it, so we don't go. Yeah. And I think the same is true at every level. A chief officer, in particular, especially if you have a place where they make you a chief officer and then you're just expected to be an expert with no training. If you know your skill set is poor, where you're trying to avoid being exposed, right? I mean, I've done enough training with chief officers. Like I've seen chief officers arrive at incident scenes where things were, and these are simulated incident scenes, but pretty realistic. I mean, I've had chief officers break down at training to it. I've had company officers do it too, right? So it's not rank specific, but you can apply plenty of pressure in these environments to make people have emotional reactions. And it's certainly a double-edged sword that you have to be careful when you're doing that sort of thing, right? You can't just do it willy-nilly. But getting through that and reviewing it and then getting another chance to do it and another chance to do it and another chance to do it. I mean, I was watching that thing yesterday about Michael Phelps' coach, and he knew early on that Michael Phelps was going to be a champion, not just because of his raw talent, but because of his work ethic and all these other sorts of things, right? So he realized very early that he started doing things like deliberately losing his bag on the way to the meet, so they'd have to borrow a swimsuit, borrow a pair of goggles, and he'd fix the goggles so they break when he dove in the water, and like all of these things of adversity, right? Wow. That are outside, like so. You know, the first time I experienced a Mayday, I was at the fire ground. I was on the fire ground. First time I had to abandon the building, I was on the fire ground. Now, it doesn't take very much work to be able to give people those experiences in training. Now, it's not going to be the same. Game speed is not the same as practice speed. And championship game speed is not the same as regular game speed. And then you take a complex incident and you have a Mayday or an abandon in the building, and you're putting a complex incident within a complex incident. But if you've never done that before, it's your first time. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so all we're talking about is making it so this is not your first time. Like you're not going to be, no incident commander is perfect. I've got audio on my computer. I could play for you and I could tell you exactly the mistakes I made, when I made them, the pieces of information I should have asked for. I could talk about the piece of information the battalion chiefs had that they should have given me, but they didn't, right? That's the nature of what we do. It's an imperfect environment with a lot of uncertainty. That doesn't mean that you can't be good at it. And it also doesn't mean you can make great decisions and have poor outcomes. And you can have terrible decisions and have good outcomes. I mean, the most simple example of that is they have a working commercial building fire. They take an 1 3/4 line and they happen to put it out. That doesn't mean it was a good decision. That doesn't mean it was the right decision just because you got a good outcome. And the reverse is obviously true, right? So, so you have the two challenges. One is the organizations often don't provide or don't see the value in providing training for chief officers, and sometimes for any officers, right? Some places, no officers are getting officer specific training outside of some, when we could provide chiefs all the training we want in HR and the fire code and whatever doesn't have anything to do with the fireground. But if you have a 40-hour academy like Seattle does, and you have 4 hours on tactics and operations, I would say that you're woefully backwards in the way that you think about it. I would have pre-study and post-study on most of the other stuff, the leadership and all that sort of stuff. And I would spend most of my time with new battalion chiefs, like putting them in the seat and giving them chances to make significant errors, so that they're not making them whatever they're doing that works out wrong on the incident in the training. You should just assume that they're going to make that same mistake in the real world. There's no evidence that shows that where you want people to make mistakes is in training, right? Not at the incident.
Where does post-incident analysis, listening to tapes and stuff like that, where does that come into play for chief officer training or company officer training at that?
Yeah, if you have the ability to listen to the fires that you go to or that your organization goes to, it's incredibly valuable. I mean, we don't have enough time to talk about all of the ways that can influence the organization. I mean, there's just so many, but I've listened. I even still listen to fires. I have a buddy that sends them to me from the organization, and it's like all of a sudden, you hear all of a sudden I might hear engine X on the radio. It's like, how did they get to floor 2? There was no assignment on the radio for them to be on floor 2, which in my organization, now they can get a face-to-face directive, and then that can be repeated on the radio, right? Which is actually a preferred way of doing it because it reduces the radio traffic. But I'll go back and go, yeah, nobody ever said anything about engine X being on floor 2. They're just there now all of a sudden. And so it's like, okay, there's a gap. Every radio transmission to the incident commander that does not get received should be considered a fatal flaw for the organization. There should be zero, and I realize that's a very high bar. There should be zero transmissions that go to the incident that are directed at the incident commander that are not received. Zero is the acceptable number. Well, why is that? Because if you're missing any of those transmissions, then you could just as easily miss a Mayday. And I've when you do all this sort of training, and it's stuff that I still do and I still love, right? If I've watched chief officers in SIMS, great chief officers. I mean, really, really highly competent chief officers. Somebody comes to command post and they begin to have a discussion with them, and radio transmissions just bypass them. They just go right by it. And it's because people you cannot listen to 2 radios at the same time. The best that you can hope for, and I don't mean 2 radios, I mean 2 means of communication. If you're talking to somebody face to face and you're engaged in that conversation, you will not hear the radio. I had to assign somebody. If I was which I love talking to, I want my company officers, when they come from the hazard area, they know to come talk to me because I want to talk to them face to face. I want their report face to face. I want to see them. I mean, I've had people show up at the command post, and when I saw them, physically saw them, I knew we were in real trouble. Right? Just the way their gear looked, the way their face looked. Like now they're, like the radio reports are, we're sort of dancing around the edge of success. But when I see those people, I go, yeah, we're not winning this thing. And I'm a firm believer you're either winning or losing. There is, like, it's Ricky Bobby school, right?
Yeah.
There is no second place. But you can get that stuff from the radio, and you can just get all the act of talking in the radio, sending and receiving information is a skill. It's a skill. And listening is a skill. Transmitting is a skill. Formulating your message is a skill. All of those skills can be honed. You can get better. You can use, instead of using 15 words, if you can use 12. Instead of using 12 syllables, can you use 8? Like, can you communicate that message in an accurate way with fewer words that are more clearly defined in the organization? Okay, if you can do that, then it's worth listening to the radio. And I can guarantee you that one of the things that I've done when I've gone and trained chief officers in departments, like groups of chiefs, is ask them to send me a radio recording from an incident that didn't go particularly well. And then we'll go through it with the chiefs, the people who were at the incident scene, people who weren't at the incident scene. And even though we get a lot of value from the exercise, what the exercise is really designed for is to teach them how much value they can get if they just listen to every fire. And there's some places where it's like pulling teeth to get the recording comes from some other agency that's controlled by the county. And even when I first started doing this, Jake, I was a battalion chief. I could not get a copy of the tape. I couldn't get one.
Oh, wow.
So now I could go on the computer and make the computer play it, and then I could record it on my phone, right? And then I could have a recording of it. But it took, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years. I started asking for them, and eventually it gets to be such a hassle for them that they just this is my experience, right? It's easier for them to give you the authority to do it yourself than it is to constantly do it for you.
Yeah.
Right? But I would listen to every single fire. Every fire that the Seattle Fire Department went to, I would listen. If I was there, I would listen to it immediately after. Immediately. And then I would start making notes, and I would get the team together, and we had to make corrections. We had to like there's company officers saying things, and you're like, why are you saying this on the Topsfield channel at this point in time? That information is, and just little things like on your arrival, and when, or battalion chief saying, bring a 35-foot ladder. Like, look, man, if you haven't trained your company what ladders they need to bring to do vertical ventilation, if you got a list, it was like, bring a 35 and a roof ladder and a saw, and like, come on, man.
A laundry list.
Right? Yeah. But that's a skill set, because that was a new chief officer, and they were processing information at the company officer level, right? Because when their mental pattern was when they had to do vertical ventilation, they started to do things at a task level mentally, because when they were a company officer, they had to have that skill. Which ladder do I need to bring? That's an important skill for a company officer. Immaterial to a chief officer. Vertical ventilation, ladder 3, vertical ventilation. If that officer cannot do that function, then you've already lost the battle. Yeah. Right. And so that's a great example of like somebody who they ended up being a highly competent, super, super competent chief officer. But when they first started, they were processing information the way that they used to as company officer. But 2, they were also still processing information that wasn't in their skill set anymore. They just need to let go. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have competence, but there's a reason why you have company officers to do those things. And if you have if your ventilation strategy is vertical, then your people should already know how to do that. And if your ventilation strategy is horizontal, your people should already know how to do that. If you're going to send a company to search, you shouldn't have to say, hey, go through the front door to floor number 2, like ladder 3, primary search, floor 2. Boom, right?
Yeah.
But those are all skill sets.
So in thinking of like kind of deconstructing an incident post, kind of analysis, how do you do it to let people walk away feeling good, but also hammer on the points that need to be hit, but also not make it just like a big pat yourself on the back, everyone high five and go home? I feel like all too often that is the tailboard is just like, all right, we killed it again. Everyone high five. We're going back to the firehouse to have pizza or whatever it is. How do you make that tailboard debrief powerful and impactful and like helpful to the companies on scene?
Well, the requirement to make that happen begins with the culture of the organization. It has to be a learning culture and not a punitive culture. So we first started using questions in these processes in the department, Seattle Fire Department. You're talking about, the early 2000s, 2002, 3, 4, somewhere in there. We started using some question-based approach to doing debriefs and just have training exercises, right? And that's because we started doing them when this is when we were doing the air management training. We wrote the air management book and started doing that training. We were asking them questions rather than telling them things, because the truth was that when they did the exercises, the learning was a very tight package of learning because the way that the things were created. And so having the students tell what they learned was so much more powerful to the other students than the instructor saying, this is what you should have learned in this scenario, right? And so we started, so that core that did that training, we started to branch. We had control of the operations training for the Seattle Fire Department, right? We wrote the curriculum. We were the lead instructors. There was a chief managing it, and he was a great chief officer, one of the best I ever worked for. Unfortunately, just to put a side note on it, but he ended up committing suicide because of the pressures of the job, right? So those things are important. And I know that's not the conversation we're having right now, but I just want you to know that like the personal experiences, right, of quality people can have those same problems. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we had control of the operations division training. So we started going, hey, can we ask a question? Let's do this writ exercise. And then let's sit them down afterwards and just ask them questions about it. And the learning was so high. So it took, but I'm telling you, Jake, it took a decade to, because then now you're trying to influence the organization from the middle, right? So, and it wasn't like, in no way, shape, or form was this just me. This was a group of people that grew and grew and grew. Right. But there was a point in time where we were doing MCOs, and I was trying to train battalion chiefs how to use this questions-based approach to doing the tailboard debriefs. So these are just training exercises, right? 2 engine and a truck doing a basement fire or whatever, something like that at the training center. Well, the chief officers were just honestly incompetent at it, right? That they had no mental model, where they'd never seen anybody do that. All of their experience was the chief going, this went well, this went poorly, you need to be better at this, right? Sort of that, top-down approach. And they just could not just ask a question and listen for the answer. Now, but within that group, right, of 6 or 8 or 10, 2 or 3 of them sort of got it, understood it, developed their skill set. At the same time, right, you're trying to I already know what happened, because I have somebody following each company, and while they're picking their gear up, I'm debriefing the people who are watching, right, and so I already know have a pretty good idea what happened at this training exercise. And I'm asking questions to try to get people to say, hey, I made this mistake, or I made that mistake, or, this is something we could do different next time, right? That open and honest and forthright. But because the organization had been so punitive and directive for so long within that group, sometimes people would just lie. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, if I call them out on this lie right now in front of this whole group of people, I'm just perpetuating. Yeah. Right. I'm perpetuating that mentality, right? I'm going to call them out. Well, I have to let it go. But again, I have battalion chiefs are like, I cannot let that go. Like you have to let it go, because this one exercise doesn't mean that much. Now you not fast forward, but you track that. Right. You track that forward, and then you start having people going, hey, the mistakes I made were these things, and the leaders have to go first. Mm-hmm. Right. And then, but once you get enough momentum of people going, hey, these are the mistakes I made, these are the things I would do differently. No, I mean, even in the Super Bowl, right? The team that wins the Super Bowl looks at the film, not the next day, but a week or two later, and people miss blocks, and people miss assignments, and quarterbacks throw interceptions. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're going to learn, you're going to have to recognize that you make mistakes, and the base of that. So let me bring this full circle to the question that you're asked. Yeah. What I think is sort of the baseline question. If you understand how decisions are made in times of stress, high stress, high uncertainty, limited information, conflicting information, competing and conflicting goals, all of the ways, and I could just keep going, all the ways we can define the fire ground. And the way that people make decisions there, if you understand it, then you'll understand, is you don't compare and contrast options. You don't do any of those things. What you do is you look at the information as you understand it. And this all happens in tenths of seconds in your head. You go, what's a potential solution? Solution A. Will solution A work? Yes. As soon as you answer that, as soon as your mind has an answer that says, yes, my solution will work, you implement the decision. It's only when you have discretionary time, like you would, on hazmat incidents, most of the time you have discretionary time. On tech rescue incidents, sometimes you have discretionary time. Right? Hazmat incidents, most hazmat incidents, you have after you get past the first 5 to 8 minutes, you probably have discretionary time. Now, it may not be a lot of discretionary time, but you have some discretionary time. On the fire ground, typically on the escalating nature of the fire ground is that you don't have discretionary time. Yeah. So the first option is it's a situation you know very well. You go, hey, will this work? You go, yep, that'll work. And you implement it. Now, the next one is you go, you come up with a solution and your mind says, will it work? And you go, no. So I'm going to lay an inch and a quarter. Will that work? No, but a 2.5 will. Right. And so you very quickly adjust to a 2.5, and then you go to work. The key is that as soon as you have a solution in your mind, that the question you're going to ask yourself in this long is, will that work? As soon as the answer is yes, you implement it. So no matter what decision anybody makes on the fire ground, you have to accept that based on their training, their experience, it was what they chose to do, they thought would work. And if it doesn't work, so we talked about this before, maybe it was a bad decision, but maybe it was a good decision that just had a bad outcome. Right. But if we accept the fact that everybody's making the best decision they can at the time they make it, and everybody's performing to the best of their ability at the time they're doing the thing, then any mistakes or errors in judgment or lack of communication or any of those things become things that where we can learn as an organization. you have good people trying to do good work under tough circumstances. And to the extent that we can make ourselves better, that's what we should be focused on. Now, there is no, well, that guy's just stupid. No, he might be poorly trained. He might have not had information. He might have filtered the information. Even if you have the right information, if you filter the wrong values, then you might make a decision that you shouldn't, right? You might, sometimes people think you know things and you don't. I mean, there's all those variables. But if at the baseline we go, look, everybody there is doing the best they can at the time they're doing it, then we can focus on the things that happened, how we can change those, how we can make them better. Can we? It took us 3 minutes to get through the door. Like, if you start forcing a door, my expectation at the command level, if you go to a residential door, it should take you 1 minute or less to get through that door. And if I can't see you and it's taking you 4 minutes, somewhere in there, you have to have the recognition that you need to call me and tell me you're having trouble. Because if I can't see you, I don't know that you're having trouble. Right? Now, if I didn't tell you that ahead of time, or we didn't practice that ahead of time, then after the fact, I go, what? It doesn't matter what took them so long, because I guarantee you that we can go, hey, is there a way what can we do in our training to help you get through doors faster? Or was this door just an anomaly? So that's one of the things that your post-its analysis can do, is that if you're consistently seeing the same problem in your post-incident analysis, then you go, okay, how do we adjust our training, our communications? How do we adjust the way that we perform as an organization to counteract this weakness? If you're seeing the same weakness, if you have 15 fires a year and you have the same weakness in 3 of them, I would say, you probably should take a look at that particular piece of the puzzle. Not the only, but one of the risks there is, like, if you have an outlying event, like, you don't change the way you do everything based on one outlying event. Unless, right, so you have one fire that went poorly, you might look at that. But if you have another fire that went poorly for the same reason, then you go, okay, right, that's 2 different officers in 2 different areas of the city on 2 different shifts. Like, there's something is happening here that we need to pay attention to. Even if it's like, in both cases, there was a lack of maintenance of the fire hydrant. Or then you go, okay, well, we better call the water department and find out what's going on over there, right? There's 14,000 hydrants in the city. If we experience 2 bad hydrants in 2 months in the fire department, then you can guarantee that there's probably a problem over there, right? But if it's a true outlier, like we've had plenty of events where, like, the event is so far outside the norm, we can take lessons from it. But we probably shouldn't adjust anything that we do on a day in, day out basis based on a single outlying event, even if that event was terrible. We had an incident where we ended up losing 3 houses, and we couldn't get a water supply, and all the drivers are going, like, my hose is hard. I'm like, all the hoses they look like they're full, but there's no water flowing. Well, the jacket liner had ripped off, right? So the hose was plugged by the jacket liner. Well, now maybe that's a hose maintenance issue, et cetera. And, but we probably don't need to change our day in, day out supply operations because of this one event in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Right. We maybe would want to understand how to identify that, right? We can do that in our drivers group, like identify, like, if everything else looks good, let's go to a checklist, right? Normally when you're doing those supply ops, you're not going to a checklist much because you know how to do all that stuff. But if we've done all the stuff we know how to do, maybe we should have a checklist somewhere that says, hey, think about this or think about that, right? What are the potential outliers? But the day in, day out operation of getting a supply from a fire hydrant, we don't need to change that, because had the hose not delaminated, we would have had 0 trouble. Right. Yeah. So the normal operation would have worked except for the outlying event. And so you want to do PIAs, and you want to focus on the tailboard debriefs, and you want to build a culture where the person who made the mistake is the first one to say that they made the mistake. And we need leaders to go first in those situations, right? Say, hey, these are the mistakes I made. Here's how I plan to get better. Let's talk about the rest of the event. But you have to have a culture that supports no cost reporting, or what are they, something like that, right? There's zero retaliation. And if you don't have that system, it's going to take, unless your organization is small and dynamic, if you have any size, it's going to take years to slowly move the organization to that sort of learning mentality. And that doesn't mean we're going to accept mistakes, right? If people demonstrate high levels of incompetence, we're not going to retaliate, but what we are going to do is we're going to fix those skill problems. And it's our fault that those problems exist in the first place. We were not doing the things we needed to do as an organization to make sure that everybody had the skill set and was maintaining the skill set. Somewhere in our organization, we weren't doing our job. And that means that person at that moment did not have that skill. And if we expect everybody to have that skill, then if one person doesn't have it, I can guarantee you there's other people that don't have it. I guarantee it.
Yeah, that's for sure, right? Especially in a large organization, like there's not that many outliers, right? There's like most people are amazingly average when it comes to, the things that they know or don't know. Like a lot of people are going to hold that same thing, I would think. Chief Joes, as we kind of look to wrap here, I have a big question for you. This is where we dig deep a little bit. You worked your 30 years in the fire service. You're technically retired now, but I'm sure you probably still work more than most people with a job. What is the Phil Joes legacy? What do you want that to be one day?
Well, I know that there are changes that happened in the Seattle Fire Department that are still there today because I was in the organization, right? And yeah, practically it's like taking your hand out of a bucket of water, right? As soon as you're gone, the hole fills, right? And the organization moves on. The organization is better than it was when I left, and I hope it was better when I left than when I got there. But I know there are changes that were made there. What I'm doing now is really the things that interest me the most: the tactical decision making, the reading smoke. I'm trying to stay mentally engaged in things so that my brain keeps working until I fall off the other end of the scale, right? So, I'm not just learning. I'm still learning here. I'm still trying to do my best. Like I still have that ownership. If I'm going to teach reading smoke, if I'm going to teach tactical decision making, which I love both of those, right? Then I need to be as good as possible at doing those things, because the people that are in the room are still on the tip of the spear. And I have to, if I have you for 2 hours, or if I'm at FDIC and it's an hour and 45 minutes, or I'm teaching in St. Paul, or I'm teaching in Miami, or wherever it is I'm teaching, if I have you for 8 hours, I want to give you as much value as I can during that time. I mean, like that's maybe going back to my old the way my mom raised me, my dad raised me was, you're going to do something, do it right. But there will come a time when I don't do that anymore. And then, I have my family legacy, my kids, my wife, the community that I have. I keep telling people ask me how long I'm going to teach and stuff. And I always put it, there's sort of there's a scale, right? And so this is my love of teaching, and this is my hate of travel. And they're starting to go like this, right? They're slowly coming together. And my wife and I travel, aside from my teaching, we travel quite a bit. We've been to Australia twice since I retired, and we've been to Europe, and we travel a lot in the US, and we go to national parks, and we're outside as much as possible. I snowboard. I try to get out in the mountains. I mean, I'm looking outside right now, wondering why there's no snow on the mountains. Right? I mean, I can see the mountains from my window right here, right now. There's no snow up there, right? So I'm just chomping at the bit. So at some point, I will quit teaching. Hopefully, we're like right now. I'm working with a guy named Ted Nee. He's out of Albuquerque. Some of your audience might recognize that name. He's been off the circuit for a little while, but he and I are working trying to get with fireengineering.com to get tactical decision-making exercises on the web, so that we can start taking some of these skills and using technology to make it so that people have access to them, even if they're not training in their own organization, to give them, sets and reps, even if they're just doing it by themselves in front of the computer, which I've done plenty of. So as long as I'm doing this stuff right, I'll keep doing it to the best of my ability. But there is a future where, and you know what, 10 years after that, nobody will even know what my name is. That's just the way it is, right, guys?
I don't know if that's the case. I think you're underselling your position inside the American Fire Service. But we're going to have to do another podcast because we didn't even touch on reading smoke somehow in an hour, but the conversation's been great. Tell the people where they can find you, where they can get in touch with you, where they can see you speak.
Well, yeah, so I have my website is ignitionpointtraining.com, right? I'm trying to set your mind on fire. So that's why I picked Ignition Point. So the ignitionpointtraining.com, on there, I keep a list of the classes that, where I'm going. We're starting out, I'll be in Miami Beach. I'll be in Pasco County, Florida for the Fools there. I'll of course be at FDIC, trying to go back to Minnesota, Missouri U, Mizzou to their fire conference. And, there's just, I can't remember all the ones I have already scheduled for 2024, or 2025, I mean, but, and then, so you can also find me on YouTube. So for the reading smoke stuff, I try and post on there. It's not every week, but I try to. There's well over 100 videos on there, where you can just go. Those are 100%. That none of that stuff's monetized. It's just there for you to use, for you to grow, for you to train yourself, for your company. They're just. My intention would be to have that stuff, maybe even out, maybe even when I'm in the ground, that stuff is still out there. If it's still accurate, that's one of the things that has been challenging about the curriculum is keeping up with, what are the reading smoke cues for transitional? How do you know that's working? Exterior tax, interior tax, like some of that stuff is I think it's from a historical perspective, we're in a time of dynamic change, which is, I think, both really exciting and really challenging if you're on the tip of the spear like you are. And then, so that's it. Really, my website, ignitionpointtraining.com. There's lists of my classes there, and you can get my contact information there. It's Phil at ignitionpointtraining.com, and I answer emails and I try to make sure I'm getting to all my messages on not the TikTok because I don't do that, but the Insta or the Facebook. I'm not a huge social media guy. I'm trying to learn. Again, that's something I'm trying to learn how to do better. But that's where you can find me.
Yeah, and we'll put all that stuff in the description so that anyone that wants to see you or find out where they can see you speak. But like I said, we'll have to have you on. We didn't even get to reading smoke somehow in an hour, but it was great. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge. I appreciate what you're doing for the fire service. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course.